When sleazy salesmen and cloud apps collide. Cast your eyes back a few, or more, years back to the time that cloud apps were the shiny new hotness. If you didn't have them, your company was a relic of the Stone Age, and could no longer sit at the cool kids table. Lol, some people actually believe that Dribble, including our chief sales officer, CSO. He'd seen an advert on the back of an Inch Flight magazine for this cloud app and instantly knew this was our ticket into the new age of business, exploding sales, stonks memes, and fat bonuses. And so he did what any reasonable person would do. Have a chat with the head of IT, me, about this awesome new application. Lol, wishful thinking. But he did organize a demo of the software with the C-suite and senior management team. At least that's something, right? Some time later, we trundle into a conference room with our sleazy sales guy, and our cloud app sleazy sales guy for this demo. Through the demo, the ops manager leans over and whispers, "This looks like MS Excel." I nodded, not wishing to miss the good stuff. After the demo, nobody is especially impressed, except for our CSO. We just saw a half-developed online spreadsheet with some fancy graphics. But we're not finished yet, it's the CSO's turn to sell it, and we spend the next half hour being entertained by all the business applications he's got lined up for it. It's going to create a collaborative workforce, it's going to foster information sharing, it's going to enforce single source of truth, it's going to streamline business processes, it's going to be available anytime and anywhere, their support team can remotely help, and it's going to replace MS Excel. That's when the mic dropped. See, none of the department heads really cared until it impacted them directly. They all use Excel extensively, and what they heard was we were going to take it away and replace it with something SH tier. Can we import our Excel files? Can we link sheets? Can we filter XYZ? Can we, and so on? And the answer was nearly always no, but that feature is on our roadmap. Until this point, I had been quiet. I'm a grizzled old IT manager. I've been through this, and seen how it plays out, and it was my turn to put the final nail in the coffin. So if this is cloud-based, where is it hosted? Singapore, the cloud sales guy replied. CSO, you do realize that a majority of the data you're proposing to host is controlled under license that doesn't allow for third-party access, and especially exporting from our country? It's a rhetorical question, of course. The discussion is over, and I'm closing my notebook and getting ready to leave. I've wasted enough time on this. CEO starts to thank everybody for their time. We're not going to buy the software. We've already bought the software. This is the project kickoff meeting. Mic drop. To be fair, my stunned goldfish expression is simply because the grizzled IT manager who's seen it all, has in fact, not seen it all. Cutting to the chase, our company of 200 factory workers and 70 engineers, office workers, etc. now had a subscription to 500 seats of this spreadsheet software. Why 500? That's the minimum commitment. Apparently. The annual cost of this license was about the same as buying Office Pro for every employee, 3 times over. Every year. And because it was a professional service, not software, the purchase wasn't flagged for IT review. Where did this money come from though? It was reallocated from HR software project that we were going to commence in a few months' time, a headcount reduction, because improved efficiency, with the remaining supposed to come from canceling various MS software maintenance contracts that we obviously didn't need anymore. Hint, Office was a perpetual license without any SA. I'm still goldfishing, finance manager is having a heart attack, HR manager is having conniptions, and the CEO is looking like an axe murderer. But, as it turns out, we had the software. None of the managers wanted anything to do with it. They were still very attached to Excel and weren't going to volunteer to give it up. It was the HR manager who was voluntold. After all, her software project was now off the cards. But never fear, our cloud spreadsheet friend has personally guaranteed that his software will do the job. All we needed to do was engage his recommended third-party delivery consultant and they would spec up and quote for the design and implementation work. And that was our third drop of the afternoon. So how did this all pan out? Firstly, the CSO didn't get fired, but his name was mud for a few months. He did get fired later for something more egregious though. The headcount reduction came from the CSO's open positions, but after complaining bitterly, that burden was transferred to Ops and the CSO went on a hiring spree. The consulting bill came in at about 5 times the original budget we had for the HR software project. It didn't work, and they went back to using MS Excel. Despite the finance manager's best effort, they couldn't fully reconcile, cover up, the financials and process loopholes and ended up getting a stink eye on their yearly audit. The budget cuts were eventually eaten by IT, of course. I did cancel the sales team's laptop refresh plan that year. I also made sure that the laptops I refreshed that year for other people were awesome. I'm pleased to report that it caused a whole bunch of jealousy drama. Petty and vindictive, I know the subscription contract was for 2 years, and despite our commercial manager's best effort, we paid a second year. Ugh. Reliving that has given me heartburn. Enjoy. Story 2. That's not a usable ground. Once upon a time in the not-so-distant past I installed large-scale PBX phone systems in a number of southern states. We did hospitals, businesses, and a surprising number of department stores. It was one of those stores where this story takes place. I was working for a company whose phone systems had an onboard computer system complete with 8 inches floppies and a distinct dislike for unsteady power. In order to appease the PBX gods, we had a strict list of requirements for the room environmentals and the power and grounding. The room needed to be clean and without excessive dust, with climate control, temperature in the 70-degree range on the Fahrenheit scale. Most of all, it needed dedicated 3-phase 208 vac power with a dedicated computer ground. This involved the XO lug on the supply transformer and ideally included a link to a ground rod or building steel. The number of times I, a brash young guy in my mid-20s, had to inform a crusty good old boy electrician that what he thought was a ground wasn't good enough and whether the resultant storm still gives me nightmares, but it paled to one install I did in a small city in South Carolina. I arrived at the start of the scheduled installation week bright-eyed and bushy-tailed, ready to go. As we descended to the intended phone room, I became quickly aware of the technological revelation that we were bringing to the store. Sitting outside the phone room was the current phone console, with the operator wearing a headset and very literally switching and connecting calls like you see in old movies, plugging and unplugging cables in an upright patch panel. Keep in mind that this was the late 80s. From the room next to her, our destination, I heard a steady clack, clack, clack of machinery. Upon entry I discovered that the phone system was the old-style stepping switch equipment. The noise in the room was deafening and relays and contacts continually made and released. My interest in the antiquated equipment was, however, dampened by the condition of the room. They had mounted the plywood on the wall that we required for our 66 blocks, wiring points, and electrical power had been pulled into the room, but that was it. There was no ground bar, no power, the room was at least 90 degrees, and worst of all, the floor was covered in such a thick layer of dirt and dust that we were leaving footprints as we walked. I immediately informed our customer contact that this was not acceptable and why, and after I left a specific list of items that needed to be done before I returned, I drove back to the airport to return home. A week later I returned to the site, and things were better, marginally. The floor had been wet mopped, so that parts of it were now at least clean enough to see the tile, but other sections were covered with dried mud where the mop water and floor dirt combined and settled down together. The ground and electrical still hadn't been done, and the HVAC contractor was there giving a quote for putting AC in the room. The room was still unusable and the client wasn't happy when I told him as much. We had one more quick meeting going over the problems, and handwritten copies of our requirements were given to everyone involved and a few people that weren't. Since the floor in that spot was relatively clean, I uncrated and moved the phone switch, the main cabinet with the phone system, in this case about 6'X6'X3, into position and mounted some of my equipment on the wall. I then returned home for another week. 1 week later I was on site in the store's basement again, and this time was pleasantly surprised to feel a blast of cool air hit me in the face as I opened the door. The floor had been decently cleaned and looked good. My pleasure started slipping as I walked through the room, however. The electrical source still was not terminated. I saw no ground bar on the wall. The air conditioning had been lovingly and professionally installed, complete with open-top drip pan, directly over the top of my $200,000 phone system. My imagination didn't have to work hard to figure out where the condensation was going to the first time that the drip pan drain clogged and the pan overflowed. And the realization wasn't good. Calming myself, I asked about the 208V power. The building engineer replied that they had tried and were unable to find that particular NEMA connector anywhere. I grabbed the nearest phone book, remember, it's the 80s, specifically the Yellow Pages, and found an electrical supply store within walking distance. I left the store and walked down to the supplier, who quickly sold me the necessary electrical connector. I took it back and tossed it to the engineer with a jaunty "There you go." Then I addressed the last item on my list. "Where's the ground?" I asked. The engineer pointed me to a large 1/2 braided copper cable mounted in the corner. It disappeared into holes in the floor and the ceiling. "Okay," I said, pointing to the hole in the floor. "Where does that go?" I asked. "To a 6-foot ground rod under the building." The engineer replied proudly. "Excellent." I replied. "And where does that go?" I asked, pointing to the hole in the ceiling that the cable disappeared into. "To the lightning rods on the roof." He replied. He wanted me to connect his new $200,000 phone system, and every phone in the building, to the lightning rods on the roof. We didn't do the installation that weekend, either.